United Nations peacekeepers provide a free clinic in a remote village in troubled Mali. Former Somali refugee Ilhan Omar makes history as the 116th United States Congress is sworn in. And after phenomenal successes, are Black films now part of the Hollywood mainstream? Africa 54 starts right now.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Vincent Makori. This is Africa 54. We begin tonight's broadcast with good news for the residents of Mali. Some of the more remote parts of the country are now receiving free medical care. The United Nations mission in Mali recently deployed armed peacekeepers to the landlocked African nation, which has been in turmoil since the government temporarily lost control of the north in 2012. Viewers Arash Arabasadi reports.
Aboard this helicopter is much-needed medical help for residents in a remote part of Mali. The West African nation has been in turmoil for about 7 years since rebels and loosely allied Islamists briefly seized control of the north in 2012. Now, with help from armed peacekeepers, area residents can at least get medical checkups.
I'm very relieved after being seen by the doctor. They are doing a great job.
The UN Security Council deployed the troops, but providing security and humanitarian assistance in the vast scrublands of Africa's Sahel region is a daunting task.
We do not have all the necessary paraphernalia, but we are doing our best, even against the recurrent diseases we find.
Despite this push for medical exams, remote clinics have a hard time providing care.
Most of the patients are elderly people with chronic articular diseases like arthritis and ocular problems in particular. There are some illnesses that we cannot treat with the limited resources we have here. Diseases like cataracts and glaucoma. Those are diseases that need more specialized care.
The government says armed men killed 37 civilians in central Mali on New Year's Day, further complicating the already difficult task of bringing basic health care to Mali's most at-risk residents. Arash Arbasadi, VOA News.
Somalia's United Nations envoy on Thursday urged the UN not to interfere in his country's internal affairs 2 days after the Somali government expelled the World Body's top official there. The Somali federal government ordered UN envoy Nicholas Haysom to leave the country just 4 months after he took up his post as the United Nations Secretary General Special Representative. The government is upset over Haysom's raising of the case of Mukhtar Robo, a former leader of the terrorist group Al-Shabaab, who sought to run for the presidency of the southwest state. The National Electoral Commission banned Robo from running, while the Southwest State Electoral Body said he could be a candidate. Well, it was a jubilant and emotional moment for Ilhan Omar as she arrived in Washington to commence her new role as a U.S. Congresswoman. Omar was accompanied by family and friends as she entered her congressional office on Capitol Hill. Standing next to her father on Thursday, Omar told the media that it was a very emotional moment arriving from Minneapolis at the Washington National Airport with her father, the same airport they first landed when they arrived as refugees from a Kenyan refugee camp. Omar's father said it was amazing to see his daughter elected to Congress. Mohammed Dahir Farah is among dozens of Somali Americans who came from Minneapolis to attend Ilhan's swearing in ceremony.
It means a lot to me. It means she broke the wall. It's momentum for the Somalis. It's the first time a person became a congresswoman for the Somali community in Minnesota. And it will be encouraging of our community, whether it's in Minneapolis or Muslim or African Americans. So we are very happy on behalf of the Somalis in Minnesota and on behalf of the Somalis in Somalia. I want to congratulate to Ilhan for the new post she get.
Well, that was Mohammed Dahir Farah, who is a Somali American from the state of Minnesota. Now, after her swearing in, Congresswoman Omar thanked supporters and constituents at a Washington reception, reflecting on expectations for the new Congress and the opportunities that brought her to Capitol Hill.
We are going to make this country one that lives up to its ideals of inclusion, of religious liberty, one that recognizes this is a land that is stolen from indigenous people, built on the backs of black slaves, and one that welcomed immigrants so many years ago, and still will, and will continue to send them to Washington to represent its people. I come from countries right now that are on the Muslim ban. If this ban was happening 23 years ago, if the reduction of refugees being allowed in this country was happening 23 years ago, my family and I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have the opportunity to get an education, start a family, and now get to represent all of you in Congress. For so many years, there has been a particular narrative developed on what a Muslim woman looks like, what she acts like, who gives her permission to do what, who has a right to her voice, to her body, who helps her get dressed in the morning, can she leave the house or not. And today, as we walked in to the United States Congress, we said, we give ourselves permission to be here. We get to decide what we wear when we leave our houses. Our rightful place is also in Congress. Our daughters, our moms, our grandmothers, our aunties have always been the backbones of all of our communities. We have never needed a permission or an invitation. All we ever asked was for people to step out of our way so we could take our rightful place.
Now, 2018 marks the 25th anniversary of the U.S. National Guard's State Partnership Program, where states and territories are marched with nations across the globe to grow their military and government capabilities. 81 nations are partnered with National Guard troops, many of which are in Africa. VOA Pentagon correspondent Calabab sat down with Command Sergeant Major Christopher Kepner, the senior enlisted advisor of the National Guard, to talk about the State Partnership Program's goals on the continent and what's next for the National Guard in Africa.
Well, I'll tell you, the State Partnership Program, we have 13 nations partnering with 11 states. We partner now to do different things like medical training. We also do disaster relief partnerships, building the non-commissioned officer corps, poaching, interdiction. Really, whatever a nation might need, we try to bring that capability and tailor what they're looking for to help them build that security within their own nation.
Counter-poaching, what benefit does that bring to the countries?
Oh, well, when you have that poaching that goes on inside of those countries, it affects the economy. It's illegal activity. It's also can be a sign to the nation that there's not the rule of law. And so those kinds of things are very, very important to help that nation provide security within its own borders.
Why should Africans not be nervous about these partnerships?
Because these partnerships are really designed to help them bring what they need to help them have security within their individual countries. So it's really not an American solution coming in to fix all of their problems. It's about augmenting these nations to help them become stronger.
You look at Africa Command's website and you look at the number of activities going on in Africa, and there seems to be more and more every year.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about why that is, why Africa is gaining importance with the United States.
Africa is a very, very important continent. And really, if you look at our national defense strategy, one of our main lines of effort is to strengthen partnerships and allies. And that fits right in with the continent of Africa and those nations on the continent of Africa to help them be security providers throughout the world and not security consumers.
How does a hurricane in one state affect its ability to get out and work these partnerships?
Yeah. So I have to tell you, and so not only with hurricanes, keep in mind for the last 15 years of war, we have been globally deployed, supporting that fight as well. But to get to your question about how do we do that, we're 450,000 strong with Army and Air National Guardsmen. And when you have a state partnership, you just don't have access to that state. You have access to the entire capability of the National Guard.
Do we still have a light footprint in Africa, or have we increased our footprint?
So I'll tell you this, from a state partnership program perspective and a National Guard perspective, we are increasing our footprint from the perspective of we have 2 more countries right now that are going through the process, not approved yet, but are going through the process to see if we are going to have partnerships with them. So the state partnership program, I can say confidently, is growing in the continent of Africa.
And the 2 states that would be partnered with those countries, I know you can't name the countries, but what 2 states are looking at being added on?
Can't name those either because it's still going through the staffing process.
Okay, fair enough, sir. And then my final would be, because of this increased footprint, does any of that have to do with the counterterror fight?
I think to say that it has to do with the counterterror fight is too narrow, if that makes sense to you. There's a broad spectrum of capabilities that we bring to, like I said, to include disaster relief, to include partnering for non-commissioned officer education, to include training and crosstalk, and like I said, mutual relationships. I think to say that the counterterrorism piece is too narrow to say that's why we're increasing the footprint. It's much, much broader than that.
Well, that was VOA Pentagon correspondent Calabab speaking with Command Sergeant Major Christopher Kepner, the senior enlisted advisor of the National Guard. Now, the 5 hottest years on record have all taken place this decade, and it looks like 2018 will join their ranks. This year showcased the hazards of climate change while showing how far the world is from confronting it. The VOA's Steve Baragona looks back on a year of climate catastrophes and controversies.
In November, California's deadliest wildfire on record killed 88 people, a grim example of consequences on a warming planet. The state's fires are getting worse, says former wildfire fighting chief Ken Pimlott.
Things are changing. The folks can say what they want to say, but when firefighters are living climate change, it's staring them in the face every day.
In September, Hurricane Florence's record-breaking rains caused massive flooding in North Carolina. Fire at one extreme, water at the other, like the difference between where the world is headed and where it needs to be. UN scientists issued a sobering report ahead of December's climate talks in Poland. Ho-Sung Lee chaired the panel.
It shows that the window to limit warming to 1.5 degrees is narrow, that it would require net global emissions of carbon dioxide to fall by about 45% by 2030. Every year matters.
But this year, emissions rose by an estimated 2.7%, the biggest jump since 2011. U.S. government scientists published an equally stark report in November on the impacts of climate change on the nation. President Donald Trump rejected it.
I don't believe it. You don't believe it? No, I don't believe it.
Trump told VOA that cutting emissions would be too expensive.
I'm not going to put the country out of business trying to maintain certain standards that probably don't matter. When you look at China and when you look at other countries where they have very, foul air, they have not good air, we're going to be clean, but they're not, and it costs a lot of money.
But Trump's efforts to loosen regulations on producing and burning fossil fuels have met with mixed results so far, says the Natural Resources Defense Council's Jake Schmidt.
The good news is that a number of those are being held up in court. The progress is a bit slower in terms of unwinding them, but clearly everything that's been on the climate action agenda for the last couple of years, the Trump administration is trying to undo.
Trump's Republican Party lost control of the House of Representatives in the midterm elections. That will mean more pushback from Democrats on climate and much more in 2019. Meanwhile, Trump's hostility toward climate science did not stop UN negotiators from reaching a deal in December on a rulebook for carrying out the Paris Climate Agreement. Critics say it does not go nearly far enough, but getting everyone on board was not easy, says meeting chair Michal Kurtika.
In these circumstances, every single step forward is a big achievement. And through this package, you have made 1,000 little steps forward together.
But step forward carefully, experts warn. Raising fuel taxes to fight climate change helped bring yellow vest protesters to the streets in France. Who will pay the cost of climate action as the bill for past inaction comes due? It's a question for 2019 and beyond. Steve Baragona, VOA News.
According to the United Nations Environmental Program, Africa will be severely struck by the impacts of climate change. It poses a particular threat to continued economic growth and to livelihoods of vulnerable populations. Anthony Young, Director for Climate Change and Green Growth with the African Development Bank, recently spoke with Africa 54's Lino Madu about the effects of climate change on the continent.
It's important that African leaders understand that climate change is a cross-cutting issue. It shows up in your agriculture, the droughts, the floods, and so on. And sometimes a particular country just comes out of a drought only to enter into a flood. It shows in your water resources, it shows in your energy, it shows up in education, it shows up everywhere. So we need to understand that you do not look at climate change just as an externality, let's leave it, we'll deal with it later. While you are waiting, it's negatively affecting your entire economy. So that's the message we're trying to send out. But when you also look at the opportunities that climate change brings, and so if you look at the map of Africa, you'll see opportunities for renewable energy, solar, across the entire middle part of Africa. You see opportunities for hydroelectricity across all our major lakes and rivers. You see opportunities for climate-smart agriculture all over the place. So we need to take advantage of this. The cost of renewable energy, for instance, solar, has crashed so much. This is the time for the African continent to look at it and say we can provide electricity to our citizens at a very reduced cost and provide it clean. So that's why we've established the Africa Financial Alliance on Climate Change. And the idea here is to bring together all the major players in the financial sector and align their investments in a way that would drive Africa on a greener development pathway. So we have principles that institutions will adhere to. It's voluntary. And then ultimately, we're going to develop an index that will rank African financial institutions in terms of their contributions to driving this green transformation on the continent.
Anthony Young is the Director for Climate Change and Green Growth with the African Development Bank. Well, I want to know what you think about Africa 54 and the stories we covered. Join the conversation on Facebook. The address is Africa 54. We're also streaming our show live on Facebook, so check us out and share our show with your friends. Find me on Twitter at Vincent Makori. Still ahead on Africa 54, will 2018 successes open Hollywood's doors for other black films? But first, a look at Friday's headlines. Well, 2018 was a year of box office successes and awards of artistic recognition for black films. Marvel's action flick Black Panther introduced the first black superhero lead actor and grossed over $1 billion domestically and internationally. Other films with black leading characters also did very well with audiences and critics. Do these distinctions signal that black films are finally part of the Hollywood mainstream? VOA's Penelope Pulu has more.
Ryan Coogler's Black Panther, about a fictional African king with superhero powers and his technologically advanced country, Wakanda, has received dozens of awards and been recognized as one of the year's 10 best movies for its social and artistic significance, celebrating African and African-American cultures. Producer Nate Moore spoke to VOA about the film's power.
African-American audiences, there's a lot to pull from, and hopefully there's some inspiration, again, about learning about the roots of where African-Americans came from.
Black Panther is also the third highest grossing film ever in the United States and an Oscar contender. But will its success open Hollywood's doors for other black films? Too soon to tell, says media expert Richard Craig.
I think Hollywood processes that the way Hollywood processes most things, and that's looking at the bottom line, the profit margin.
But Craig believes it will be a while before high-budget film franchises, such as James Bond or Spider-Man, are produced with black actors as leads. He says the only black Spider-Man on film is the animated Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
We're given this cartoon version of Spider-Man to accept this black face as Spider-Man, as opposed to having a real-time, real-place actor.
However, Craig says black movies with political or cultural messages and star actors and filmmakers attached to them have a good chance being funded by Hollywood.
Since you asked, I hate blacks.
Two such films this year are Spike Lee's Black Klansman, a dark satire based on a true story about an African-American cop infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan.
You ready for this?
And If Beale Street Could Talk, a romantic drama about social injustice and incarceration of African-American men in 1970s America by Oscar-winning filmmaker Barry Jenkins. Both films are expected to be Oscar contenders.
Let me give you a tip. You want to make some money here? Use your white voice.
My white voice?
I'm not talking about Will Smith's wife, like this young blood.
Hey, Mr. Kramer, this is Langston from Regal View.
But smaller black films by lesser-known filmmakers also showed that they can make their mark in theaters if their message speaks to the audience. Sorry to Bother You, by Boots Riley, advocates activism against the economic exploitation of corporate America.
Out of the car.
George Tillman's drama, The Hate You Give, about a police shooting of an African-American teen in a black community, also went viral. Tillman said that was because the film offered an authentic depiction of African Americans killed by police, and its message resonated with audiences all over the country.
It's about black people, poor people, everybody at the bottom.
Penelope Pulu, VOA News, Washington.
Welcome back to Africa 54, and here's what's trending. Rising suicide rates and depression in U.S. teens and young adults have prompted researchers to ask, what if devices some fear are contributing to tech-age angst could also be used to detect it? That idea is the spark to develop phone apps to identify an impending mental health crisis. Studies have linked heavy smartphone use with worsening teen mental health. But it turns out that as teens scroll through social media, they're leaving enormous digital footprints that might offer clues to their psyches. Last year, after a live-streamed suicide, Facebook trained its artificial intelligence systems to flag certain words or phrases in online posts that could indicate imminent self-harm. Well, next up, a classic 1980s home computer, the Sinclair ZX Spectrum, earned British inventor Sir Clive Sinclair a reputation as an innovator. Now, nephew Grant Sinclair has launched a build-your-own pocket gaming computer. The Pocket Raspberry Pi gaming kit comes unassembled but can be put together in about 30 minutes. All hardware snap fits together. Despite being the size of a smartphone, Sinclair says Poco is essentially a fully functional PC that allows users to program animations and games using a drag-and-drop interface. It can also be hacked and modified by users, he added, turning them into devices such as burglar alarms or night vision contraptions. The Poco costs $190 and the first orders are expected to ship in early 2019. Well, lastly, a number of elderly individuals across the U.S. suffering from brain disorders are spending their days with new friends that bark, purr, and are eager to spend hours in laps being stroked. Only these aren't real pets. They are lifelike companion pets created by ageless innovation. According to a 2016 study published in the Journal of Alzheimer's Disease, those who regularly interact with a robotic pet 3 times weekly for 20 minutes each session were found to have lower levels of stress, anxiety, and depression. Robotic pet therapy is a growing phenomenon. In Templeman House, a British care home, robotic dogs equipped with sensors are being used to elicit memories from residents and spark conversations with care providers. And that's what's trending today. Well, we leave you now with Zimbabwean artist Ja Praiser. From his latest album, here is Zamutsana. From all of us in Washington, have a good night and a great weekend.
Zvaka